Okay, so let's go through Chapter 17, which is Human Resource Management, and we'll discuss a couple of things here. Okay, now let me just deal with this. Okay, so important things of HR: cost. High cost of finding competent workers, motivating your current workforce, retaining your employees, defending against charges of discrimination, loss of customer satisfaction, and low employee morale, and wrongful discharge. So these are all kind of big things for small businesses. So recruitment process. So you define the position that you're looking for, and you have some qualifications. That's a good start for sort of setting up a job, set of job requirements. And then analysis is a process of gathering information about the job, including job description and job specifications. So indicates what is done on the job and how it is to be done and who is to do it, to what degree. Foundation, which is all the human resources. Okay. So it's foundation for other human resources activities and used to ensure the quality of employment opportunity. Okay, thing about this, you do a job analysis, you say, what do we think needs to be done, and you start outlining a set of responsibilities for a job. And you also probably start thinking about the type of person that you would want to fill those responsibilities. Here's the thing. Very often people have like this wish list of all these things. I would like someone that has, 30 years of experience, 3 PhDs in the field, has filed a number of patents, cured cancer, built a village in Africa. You have all these crazy requirements that you have in the job, and you may not find anyone who's going to fit those requirements. Or you may have a job that's got a relatively simple set of requirements. You hire this person that you think would be good for the job. When they get in, you begin to learn about their strengths and weaknesses. You may modify what they do, or they may, in a sense, modify you as an employee. Can very often sort of modify what your job is by presenting what you can do or what you would like to be doing. So job requirements tend to be, even though they're formal, they tend to be a very fluid thing that can change over time or based upon the individual that you have. And also when you look at jobs, think about this. You create a job specification thinking that this is what this job will continuously be. Guess what? Over time, the need for that job, the need for those specific tasks within the organization may change. They may no longer be necessary. So I would just prompt you to think about that. All right. Steps in analysis. So you gain support and cooperation of the employees. You identify the job that needs to be analyzed. You choose the analysis technique. Sorry. So identification of facts, skills requirements, job responsibilities, the level of effort and demand that's going to be put on people in order to accomplish this job, and working conditions that are going to be for the job. And there's different philosophies on this, by the way. So in some people, I've looked at some companies where their philosophy was sort of to a Frederick W. Taylor, scientific management sort of approach, where they break the job into its simplest components and then hire for the lowest common denominator on a set of requirements. So you end up having several people doing relatively simple jobs instead of one sophisticated person doing a larger, more sophisticated job. There's a definite philosophical difference in different organizations. Some companies want the higher talented person who's more fluid and brighter and can pick up on what the real requirements are in the field and modify and change to meet them. Other people want to pay less, have people be interchangeable, and have high turnover. Even could be they believe this is going to have a high turnover, so we don't mind because it's easy to hire for these individual positions than it would be for the one bigger position. It's really a philosophical sort of thing. So a job description identifies the job, gives you a summary of the job, lists the essential duties of the job, and the tasks that have to be done by the job. Okay, again, we've talked about that already. Skills, knowledge, abilities. KSAs is a big thing in HR. So what are the skills, knowledge, and abilities, KSA, that are required for this job? If you look at that, just think about, if you're looking at the individual, what skills, what knowledge, what abilities. Um, okay, now, here's the thing. We said before in the law section that you can't discriminate against people. Here's where I'm going to tell you how you can discriminate against people. So if it is a bona fide occupational qualification for you to have this job, to have certain attributes, then you can hire for those attributes. For example, it is probably a good idea that if you have a men's room attendant, that he is male. So you could say that this is a bona fide qualification, that, you know, handing out the towels in a high-end nightclub where you've got a men's room attendant which, you know, puts soap on your hands and, you know, helps you with dressing or whatever. That could be, if you're, could be a male, have to be a male. If you're doing, if you're in a high-end lingerie shop and you have someone sizing brassieres, someone measuring women for brassieres, you could say that the qualification is that person be female, that has to be part of the bona fide occupational qualifications. So there are situations where that could be, and so you have to think about, you know, if you are a Catholic high school and you're hiring a religious instruction teacher, you could say that person has to be Catholic. You could say that would be a bona fide qualification. So there are limited situations in which you can have the right to hire someone based upon their gender, their religion, their national origin, or certain job requirements. Another example of bona fide qualification could be that the person, you can discriminate against someone, for example, who is wearing a hijab if they have to be around certain types of equipment where that might get caught in it and create a health and safety situation. You know? So, so there can be situations where you do this, but it's got to be what they call a bona fide occupational qualification. It's got to be really required for the job. Okay, types of recruitment you would do. Okay, you can advertise for employees, you can use employment agencies, job sites, executive recruiters, employee referrals. We'll kind of break these down, friends and family. All right. Okay, the advantages of advertising for an employee. Usually you can get a broad set of people depending upon how and where you advertise. You get a large number of respondents, and, you know, so you might get someone. This assumes that the qualifications are relatively common qualifications. The disadvantage is that you can get a lot of unqualified people from just doing a very broad advertisement. Okay, and employment agencies. This is, I think, what their book is talking about here is sort of government sort of employment agencies, in which case you can, you know, they can pre-screen people before sending them to you, help you find some more skilled employees. Now, there are some disadvantages to these types of agencies. So, for example, I had an uncle who was running a small manufacturing shop, and he was going to the state unemployment office to try to get employees to work in this job. And they said, you know, they asked him the question, do these employees have to have any special qualifications? And he said, no, all they have to do is be able to read a ruler. Well, the woman on the other side of the phone paused and said, that sounds like it's a kind of important, you know, difficult thing to find someone who can actually read a ruler. You know, you remember like rulers? So you don't always get the most high quality or talented people in that, but it doesn't cost you anything really usually. Okay, executive recruiters have an advantage if you're looking for something where people have to have a unique or rare skill. For example, rare skill might be you're looking for a tax attorney. Tax attorneys are hard to come by. They're in a very, very high demand. And so they're not usually out there searching job sites looking for a job. They might be. You could find a situation where someone's just got out of a job or just graduated from law school. Maybe they're looking for a job. But working tax attorneys with years of experience are hard to find. So you might need a recruiting firm that will actually find these people that already have jobs, pre-vet them to find the ones that aren't crazy, and then bring them into your shop. The disadvantage of executive recruiters is they tend to be expensive. Anywhere from say 10% to 40% of the first year's salary is what they'll charge. Hovering usually around 30%. So if you think about that, that's pretty expensive. 20-30% of a first year's salary. But on the other hand, for you to get the right person in a relatively quick period of time without having to go through thousands and thousands of resumes, they do actually create value, these companies, in the right situation. Okay. Internet job sites, the positive side of that is that most of them today, even though you'll get thousands and thousands and thousands of resumes sometimes, they can have sort of filters where they'll pre-qualify some of these things. They'll search the resumes and look for certain keywords, or certain things, like maybe it requires that you have a master's degree, right? It could look for that. It could automatically filter those for you so that you're getting better qualified than just, say, a newspaper ad. Okay. Employee referrals have an advantage because they tend to know these people, and so you tend to have lower cost of finding people, and very often they're sort of pre-vetted by the time they get to you. The disadvantage is you end up with what we would call homophily, that people tend to be friends with people that are very much like themselves, and so your talent pool tends to be very similar to each other, which is a bad thing if you're looking for. It's a good thing if you're looking for people to get along, because they probably will, right? It's a bad thing if you're looking for any innovation or progress forward, because people all think the same. So there's advantages and disadvantages. Okay, relatives and friends, I will tell you this, I think this would depend upon the organizational culture. The problem with hiring relatives and friends is that some of them could take advantage, or some of them may be resentful if you're trying to be a boss. So you may know them very well, and you may have a pretty good idea of their abilities or disabilities. But on the other hand, if people aren't mature about this, or if people don't know how to take criticism, there can be a lot of resentment that can go on for years. Or you could just be carrying these people who are pretty much dead weight for years. I could say, again, I have my own family has had businesses, and for the most part, the culture was that anybody who's in the family has got to work twice as hard as anybody who's not. And that was sort of understood, right? And people were called out if they weren't setting an example for other people. I worked, however, for a small company. I worked for a couple other small companies that had family members in the business that were mailing it in. They knew that they were in the family, and they figured, I can't get fired. And so they got away with crap. And it really is demoralizing for the people who work there who weren't in the family to know that these guys are just mailing it in because they're in the family. And I could keep going on, but there's some definite disadvantages to having the idiot son or the idiot nephew in the business who you just carry. It affects the overall quality of the feeling of the culture within the business, and can be a real drain on the business. Other sources, you can go to job fairs, you can go to trade associations, and there's even internet sites that specialize in industries. If I was to be looking for another job in education, there's a site called higheredsjobs.com, which professors go to look for jobs. If I was still back in the consulting business, there were sites for people in the consulting business. And when I worked in the technology industry, there were sites for only people in the technology industry. So you can find these specialized jobs. Okay. Factors to consider when hiring. Focus on hiring the best. There's Tom, what's his name, who did Good to Great. It's not Tom Peters. I'm drawing a picture in the guy's face. I cannot remember his name. Anyway, there's some very famous business writers who have written books like Good to Great, where they talk about getting the right people on the bus first. Having the right people, give you a lot of forgiveness for your mistakes. So it's better to get the right people and even pay extra to get the right people than it is to get people cheap. So think about that. If you have the right people, it becomes a lot easier and the probability of success goes up a lot higher. So get the right people. And very often you could even have a job empty because there's too many businesses want to just have someone in the role, even if it's the wrong person. That wrong person does more damage being there. It's better to not have anybody in the role than having the wrong person in the role. So overqualified is better than underqualified, which is a thing, that people are afraid of hiring overqualified people. Overqualified is better than underqualified. Hiring an individual with strong will for self-employment, hiring individuals with a strong will for self-employment. I don't know if I agree with that, but I would say maybe hiring people who are self-directed is maybe a better way of putting that. You'll find a lot of companies now where management is more like leadership, and they let people sort of make a lot of their own decisions. So you want people who are driven, that you don't have to sit on top of, that you can sort of give a general intent to and let them sort of run with their job. So that would be better. And keep a written record of employment issues, and call people out early and often if they're doing something that doesn't make sense. All right. Okay, so selection tools, you have an application form, resumes, interviews, testing. These all have a role in sort of bringing people on board. Purpose of applications: to provide a record of the applicant's desire, provide a profile of the applicant to be used for interviews, provide a basic personnel record for the applicant, become an employee, and serve the means of measuring effectiveness of the selection process. Okay, so an application form should have some basic information, and the forms themselves become less important as you go up the chain within an organization, and things become a little more subjective than they would at some of the lower levels. Okay. Think about interviews. Be prepared. I would suggest that you have a set of questions that you ask each interviewee. Now, it doesn't have to be like, I've been in places where they interview people and they literally have a list of questions written down and they read the question to the employee and they have I would say, but at least have an outline of the things that you're going to ask every employee so that you sort of consistent in your way of meeting people, that you've at least discussed all these different items. It doesn't have to be in a very structured way. It could be an unstructured way, but you check that list to make sure you covered all the spots. They say use structured interviews to a point. I'd say semi-structured interviews. Use a variety of questioning techniques. Don't be afraid to go off script a little bit if necessary. Ask non-discriminatory questions. So you have to be careful what you ask. They have to be job related. So you can't ask someone how many children they have or what religion they are, unless the religion is a bona fide qualification for the job, like a religious teacher in a Catholic school. So it's got to be job-related questions. You can't ask people how many children they have or whether or not their spouse stays at home. These are not related to the job, right? So those are actually illegal questions to ask. So, and keep good records and notes of what you actually did ask in an interview, because you don't want someone coming back and claiming that something was done that wasn't done in the interview. Okay, same thing with testing. You've got to be testing things that are valid and reliable for predicting people's outcome in the job. So, for example, Google used to ask you what your SAT scores were, and which had no relevance to the jobs that they were interviewing for, but they thought that they were an indicator of how smart you were, and they only wanted the best and brightest. Come to find out, after they did a job analysis of their current employees, that SAT scores were no indication of how good someone was for a particular job. So they stopped asking for them. So there could be a test, like let's say that you took an IQ test. Well, that may or may not have, or a Stanford Binet test, that may or may not have any indication of how well you're suited for this particular job. So is the thing a reliable and valid method of measuring how good you are for a job? And that the test results should be kept confidential. It's a big deal with testing. Okay. So types of testing: aptitude tests, personality tests, performance tests. So test a particular ability. So you're hiring someone to be a Python programmer. You might give them a test to see how much they know about Python. Physical examinations, if appropriate, and if they are not going to lead to cases of discrimination for disabilities. Now, for example, it may be a bona fide qualification for you to be able to see well to be a truck driver. So you might give people a vision test to see how well they see, because you don't want blind truck drivers driving your truck. You could have a physical examination if you're UPS to see if you can pick up and move a 50-pound box, right? Because that could be a bona fide requirement if you're unloading trucks. You could ask for drug tests. If he's particularly in certain industries, like an airline pilot, you might want to take a drug test. You could do honesty tests. People are dealing with money. You might give an honesty test. Okay. And so there's a bunch of different tests. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just say they test personality, they test IQ, they test your ability to think in certain ways, so they could be important. Okay, you could use temporary or contract employees, and this is oftentimes useful because particularly as you look in a global sense, depending upon local laws about terminating or hiring of employees, you might look at this as an alternative. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but certain industries where you've got large fluctuations in demand or seasonal work that has to be done, you could look at employment agencies to maybe help you with that. Some companies will hire professional employment organizations that will essentially hire their employees to be part of that PEO, the professional employment organization, so you don't have to deal with any of the HR issues. You just have people show up for work and do their job, and any HR thing is the responsibility of the employment company. It gets a little strange and weird when you're disciplining employees, or if there's an out of sync between you and the employment organization, but it can be useful. Factors in term classification of workers. Okay, so this gets into like gig employees. If you're like Uber, do you have control over the behavior? Do you have control over them financially? Do you control the relationships of the parties involved? This can get into that. In most cases, if I can hire subcontractors, but if I control, if I too tightly control what they do, they could be considered employees. So you have to be careful as to how much direction that they're actually taking from you, or whether or not they have their own decision-making ability as to how to do a job. They could be considered independent contractors. If you're sitting on top of them, giving them all sorts of direction, even if you call them independent contractors, you could be sued by them or by the state and be told that no, they're employees, in which case you get fines, whatever. This is an issue that's going on with Uber right now. You could have employment orientation, which is probably a good thing, but they call this onboarding in a lot of places, where you bring people in and you sort of go through what's required to be part of the organization, what's required for the job. You train them on pieces of software, you're training them on policies and procedures, and you give them all the formal and informal information that they might need to be a useful employee. Employee training is different than development. Training is training for a specific skill. Development is sort of this planned thing over time. Like, I've got this guy, he's a young guy coming directly out of undergraduate school. I want him to eventually be this person 5 years down the road. What are the different steps that we're going to have to get them to get there? What's the different types of training they might have to have? What's the different jobs they may have to have? What's the different experiences they may have to be able to get them to be functioning at this level 5 years from now? That is development, right? Training is, I want them to know how to use this piece of software. There's a difference between training and development. Okay. I'm not going to go through this. This is pretty common sense stuff. Okay. So different types of training, correspondence, job rotation. Job rotation means you have people do different jobs in the organization. Role playing, we get that. Programs, learning, conferences, you can send people to lectures, or they could just be on the job training where you can just sort of, as you're doing things, you show them what to do. All right. So different types of compensation. You've got hourly wages, you've got all salary, you've got piecework, you've got commission. Okay. You have to be careful, as particularly when it comes to things like piecework and commission, as to what would be considered legal and reasonable. I would get some sort of call on this from an HR employee or an HR professional. This can be illegal, but these are different ways you can pay people. You get bonuses, you can get profit sharing, that's different types of incentive pay. So if you reach this, you get paid this. If the company hits this goal, everyone gets a certain amount of thing. I have found bonuses tend to be more productive than profit sharing in most companies, but it depends upon how big the profit sharing check is. Often they're not that big. Sometimes it's very useful. Okay. Okay, benefits. There's certain benefits that are required by law. You have to give people health. If you're over 10 employees, you got to keep people, again, 10 employees, right? If you're over 10 employees, you got to give people health benefits usually. You got to give them insurance, time off. You got to maybe pay into some sort of education plan, depending upon how big the company is, if you have these benefits available for people. There's also things you require by law, like if they have to leave for jury duty or military service, they've got to be allowed to do that. So benefits that are not required to be provided by law, things like retirement plans, health plans are required by law over a certain size. Dental and vision are not required, but common over a certain size. Life insurance is common over a certain size. Child care is common for very large companies. And then you don't necessarily have to give people paid vacations, but pretty much common for most companies, right? Flexible benefits packages are where you get to choose, because most cases you're going to pay for part of your benefits. So let's say that you can choose the HMO or the PPO or the regular medical insurance plan. So you choose a level of medical insurance you want to get within a company. You choose whether or not you want this option or that option, whether or not you want dental or you don't want dental, whether or not you want vision or you don't want vision, whether or not you want to put more money into retirement or not put money into retirement. So these things that's when they talk about flexible benefits, that's what they're talking about. I don't think we need to do those. Okay. There are things like employee handbooks, right? And they sort of give you rules and regulations as to how things should go. Oftentimes they are like these massively thick things. Other times they're just companies that have principles. They don't have handbooks. They say these are the principles that we go by. When, always being honest and fair, always having respect for the individual, treating the customer, giving the customer the benefit of the doubt. So there would be these principles that you might have that would sort of, supersede a handbook. Other companies want to have specific things outlined. It's really up to you. There's no requirement to have a handbook. It's often a good idea, though, because it's something that people can refer back to. The problem with handbooks, though, is it's very difficult to cover every situation, and that's why some companies go to just principles. Performance appraisals, the thing about these is, usually it's at the end of a year or the end of a quarter, or even at the end of a month. People sit down with their boss, and their boss gives them a performance appraisal. How good am I doing? What is dangerous about these is far too often bosses don't want to confront people because it's awkward and difficult. And so they just give, they on a scale of 1 to 5, they give them all 5s and say, oh, good job. But after, some period of time, they just get pissed off at having to deal with the same errors all the time, and they fire the person. The person gives them a wrongful termination suit because they said, you told me I was doing fine. So performance appraisals are difficult but necessary for both you and the employee if you're looking for, and do not shortcut them. So disciplinary things, there could be a progressive approach where you say, I'm going to give you a warning, I'm going to tell you what's going on, I'm going to give you this level of discipline, and we're going to progress up, and then 3 strikes you're out, kind of thing. There could be an appeals process where you hit someone with something right away, but they can appeal through, and oftentimes it's a union kind of thing, where they appeal through the union or they appeal to a committee, usually larger organizations and smaller organizations, to get that discipline reversed. By the way, those are not necessarily this or that. These could be sort of combinations or mixtures of things. It's not an on or off, and it's to a degree. To what degree? Okay. Most employees are at-will employees, meaning you can be fired for any reason, and for cause or no cause, right? Unless it's restricted by law in some way. Okay. Restrictions on at-will. If there's an implied contract, if we either have said or it is implied that if I do this, I'm going to be around for this many years or for this period of time, then you could have a problem. If you're not dealing in good faith, if I sort of lead you to believe something because it's in my benefit and it's not really true, and then I'm not dealing with you fairly or in good faith, then I could be liable if I fire you. There could be some sort of public policy requirement, you might have to provide just cause in many cases. So there's a lot of reasons why. So establishing just cause. Why is it okay to fire someone? You have to, in most cases, it's good practice to say, why am I firing you? And you have written down specific examples of why someone's being fired. You stole money from the cash register, right? I caught you, or I've got a grocery store, I caught you taking steaks out under your shirt. And when I looked in the back of your car, there were 10 steaks, right? Or you've been overly aggressive with fellow employees on these specific occasions. And I warned you against it this time, I warned you against it this time, and this is the 3rd strike, you're out. Right? You have to be very specific. Indicate to the employee that they had prior knowledge of the rules, they had prior knowledge of the consequences. Show them the rules. The rules was a business necessity, right? You have to do this because of this reason. You've got to conduct thorough and objective investigations if people are violating the rules, and employees have to have an opportunity to present their side of the story. Now, I know of a specific case, for example, where there was someone who was accused of drinking on the job, and they tried to fire the guy for it. And it turned out that the guy wasn't drinking on the job, that he had a specific medical condition that came up which made him very unstable on his feet and made his speech slurred. It was like a neurological disease that he had gotten. It was like a virus on his brain. And the company wanted to fire him, and pretty much after hearing the evidence, they realized that you can't fire this guy. This was a medical issue, and by the way, he's getting treatment, and by the way, he's now better. So you've got to be careful to make sure that there's objective investigations as to when you're hiring someone, that you're not just, you can at the moment hire them and say, look, we're going to go investigate this, but in the meantime, you're suspended, and you could be being fired, right? Or suspended without pay pending the results of this investigation. And then if it comes out the wrong way, you're going to be fired. So you have to be very careful about covering yourself, that you don't get hit with a wrongful termination suit. Okay, and I think we sort of covered all of this. All right, so I think that's it, and I will see you in class on Monday on